The luxurious first-class cabin fell into silence when a flight attendant blocked Olivia's path. "Excuse me, ma'am, but I believe there's been a mistake. This section is for first-class passengers only," she said, her voice sharp. The eyes of the wealthy passengers pierced Olivia like daggers as her rightful ticket was questioned. No one could have predicted that just moments later, Jonathan Avery, the billionaire who was Olivia's devoted husband and a majority owner of this very airline, would walk through that door and completely shift the power dynamic in the cabin. Olivia Thompson nervously adjusted the watch on her wrist, a gift from Jonathan that reminded her of their first meeting. At 35, her simple yet elegant dress stood in stark contrast to the designer clothes and expensive jewelry that filled the priority boarding area. The first-class cabin of Avery Airways gleamed with its spacious leather seats, impeccably dressed flight attendants, and the scent of freshly served champagne. Jonathan had insisted she enjoy this flight alone as a reward for the successful charity event she had organized. "You deserve the best," he had told her before being called to an urgent meeting. He promised to meet her at the resort a few hours later. Olivia took a deep breath and handed her first-class ticket to the attendant at the gate. It was time to allow herself a little luxury, something she usually avoided despite being married to one of the richest men in the country. "I'm sorry, but this area is reserved for first-class passengers only," said Jane Simmons, the head flight attendant, eyeing Olivia's modest dress with a judgmental gaze. Jane's tone was cold, her posture tall and imposing. With perfectly styled blonde hair and a crisp navy uniform adorned with gold stripes, Jane wore her attire like badges of superiority, not service. "I have a first-class ticket," Olivia responded calmly, extending her boarding pass. Jane took it with her fingertips, as though it were contaminated, her French manicured nails gleaming under the cabin lights. "There seems to be some mistake," Jane replied, raising an eyebrow in doubt. "Maybe you were incorrectly entered into the system." She turned the ticket over as if examining it for flaws. Her lips pursed in exaggerated skepticism. A man in an expensive suit, who had been reading a financial newspaper, looked up and made a loud comment. "Happens all the time. Economy class is getting too crowded these days." Several first-class passengers glanced up, some with smirks, others with uncomfortable curiosity. A couple in matching designer outfits whispered to each other, their eyes darting between Olivia and her modest attire. Jane smiled with false sympathy, her teeth blindingly white. "Let me check if there's a place for you in the back of the plane. I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable there." The emphasis on comfortable carried a clear message: you don't belong here. Olivia felt her face flush, her embarrassment rising. "Please check again. My husband purchased this seat specifically for me," she said, her calm voice steady. A woman nearby, wearing a diamond necklace the size of a small grape, laughed softly, her voice dripping with condescension. "Darling, everyone says that when they want an upgrade. Next, you'll tell us he's a CEO or something equally creative." Discreet laughter rippled through the cabin as Jane exchanged knowing glances with another crew member. Olivia touched the watch Jonathan had given her the day they met, when she was still a flight attendant herself. The cool metal against her skin grounded her, reminding her of the simpler life she led before meeting him. She had faced prejudice before, but never expected to encounter it from colleagues in the profession she had once loved. A businessman nearby tapped impatiently on his armrest. "Some of us have meetings to get to. Can we resolve this and take off?" Jane straightened, maintaining her impeccable posture. "Please wait here while I resolve this misunderstanding," she said with a plastic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps it's better if you wait at the boarding gate while we clarify the situation." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Olivia felt a wave of conflicting emotions: embarrassment, indignation, and a flicker of anger. She could easily mention that she was the wife of Jonathan Avery, the principal shareholder of Avery Airways, but something inside her resisted. Why should she have to use her husband's name to be treated with dignity? The cabin manager, approaching with a serious expression beneath his perfectly positioned hat, spoke. "Ma'am, It appears we have a problem with your reservation. I'll need to ask you to accompany me off the aircraft while we resolve this." His tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. The looks of pity and disdain from other passengers weighed heavily on her as Olivia struggled to maintain her composure. A woman in her 60s, wearing a full set of sapphires, clicked her tongue disapprovingly. A young executive typing on his laptop barely suppressed a smirk. Olivia stood her ground, her voice steady but quiet. "My ticket is valid. I have every right to be here." Jane's smile tightened. "Security protocols, ma'am. We can't have just anyone sitting in first class without proper verification." "Just anyone," Olivia repeated under her breath, the words heavy with implication. But just then, the aircraft door opened with deliberate precision, and the imposing silhouette of Jonathan Avery filled the frame. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with broad shoulders, his presence commanded attention without effort. His navy blue Tom Ford suit, perfectly tailored, contrasted with his confident and relaxed posture. Silver threads at his temples added distinction to his otherwise dark hair, cut in an executive style that spoke of power without ostentation. The cabin fell silent as Jonathan's piercing blue eyes scanned the room, then locked onto Olivia, who was still being confronted by the staff. His expression remained neutral, but those who knew him could see the slight tightening around his ISO warning sign of controlled fury. "Is there a problem?" Jonathan's voice, deep and measured, filled the cabin. Jane and the manager exchanged panicked glances, their earlier confidence replaced with uncertainty. "Sir, we're just resolving a small seating confusion," the manager stammered, his tone suddenly more deferential. Jonathan walked down the aisle with unhurried confidence, each step bringing him closer to the confrontation. Passengers instinctively shrank back as he passed. "But that's my wife's seat, correct?" "Two-way." Jonathan's accent carried the faintest hint of his Spanish heritage, making his words melodic yet authoritative. "Your wife," Jane repeated, her face draining of color. The whisper that rippled through the cabin was electric. Jonathan positioned himself beside Olivia, his hand gently resting on the small of her backup protective, claiming gesture. His six-figure watch gleamed subtly, not ostentatiously, but unmistakably valuable. "Yes, Olivia Thompson Avery. My wife. Has there been an issue with her accommodation?" Jonathan's question, though polite, carried the unmistakable weight of someone used to getting answers. The manager's composure cracked visibly. "Mr. Avery, we had no idea. We were just following protocol." "Verify what exactly?" Jonathan asked, his gaze moving from the manager to Jane, pinning each of them in turn. "Whether she belongs in first class based on her appearance." The cabin fell into an eerie silence. The realization of who Jonathan was and the magnitude of their mistake began to dawn on everyone present. "Mr. Avery, we didn't know," Jane stammered, her face now completely pale, her arrogance evaporating as quickly as morning dew under the harsh sun. Her badge trembled as she fumbled with it. Jonathan continued, his tone unwavering. "Did you know that before we married, Olivia was the youngest head flight attendant in the history of Avery Airways?" His hand remained on the small of Olivia's back, a silent show of support. "She understands more about protocol and service than probably everyone in this cabin combined." A sigh ran through the seats. The woman with the diamond necklace, who had mocked Olivia earlier, now nervously studied the in-flight magazine. The businessman who had complained about delays suddenly found his shoes fascinating. Jonathan looked back at Jane and the manager, his voice calm, but carrying undeniable authority. "I asked for the flight to wait for my arrival because I wanted to surprise my wife. It seems I arrived at an opportune moment." The word opportune spoke volumes in understated threat, perfectly timed. "Starting tomorrow," Jonathan continued, addressing the manager, "all Avery Airways employees will undergo a new anti-discrimination training program." His eyes locked on Jane, who was now visibly trembling. "Miss Simmons, you'll be the first participant." Jane nodded silently, her career now hanging by a thread. And as for the position of Director of Customer Experience we were discussing, Jonathan turned to the manager. I believe Olivia, with her experience both in the company and as a customer, would be perfectly qualified to take over if she wishes. Olivia's eyes widened in surprise. This was the first time she had heard of such a position. She glanced at Jonathan, who smiled reassuringly. Then, Jonathan addressed the passengers, his voice calm, but loud enough for all to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. As compensation, champagne will be complimentary throughout the flight. He lowered his voice, but it still carried to those nearby. And please ensure my wife receives appropriate attention during the flight. Your future with the company depends on it. The passengers now looked at Olivia with newfound respect, not just for Jonathan's power, but for her dignity throughout the ordeal. At the luxurious beachfront resort, Olivia and Jonathan shared a glass of wine on the private balcony of their suite, the sunset casting golden hues across the ocean. You always know how to make an entrance, Olivia teased, a small smile playing on her lips. Jonathan laughed softly. This wasn't how I planned our reunion, he admitted, squeezing her hand. But I confess, it was satisfying to see their faces. Olivia gazed out at the ocean for a moment. You know, for years I've avoided using your name or position. I wanted to be recognized for my own merits, not as Mrs. Avery. And you've done that, Jonathan affirmed. The charity event you organized raised more money than any other in the Foundation's history. Olivia hesitated, touching the watch he had given her years ago. Sometimes I miss my independence, the career I was building. Jonathan studied her face for a moment. That's why I created the position of Director of Customer Experience. It's not a favor, Olivia. It's because there's no one more qualified. Olivia looked at him in surprise. You planned this before the incident on the plane? Jonathan smiled. It was going to be your anniversary gift. You have the experience, the vision, and now, after today, you know exactly what needs to be changed. Olivia felt unexpected tears in her eyes. You never stopped believing in my potential, even when I doubted myself. Jonathan gently touched the watch on her wrist. Remember what I said when I gave you this? That time is the only luxury that truly matters. How we choose to use it and with whom. Olivia nodded, remembering the young businessman she had met years ago when she served him coffee in first class. He continued, that flight attendant taught me more about dignity and excellence in 3 hours than I learned in years of business meetings. Olivia smiled, squeezing his hand. I think it's time for a new chapter. And with that, their future together began a new journey, one not defined by wealth, but by respect, dignity, and love.